the more awareness we can generate around the decision that we have that we don't have power in a certain realm, because it really is like it's a decided perception.
Yeah.
It may be more accurate to say that we're choosing not to take responsibility, and why, right? Why is that childlike posture of dependency, outsourcing of agency, more comfortable in one given arena of our life? What is it that we're getting out of it? Because usually, I always tell my patients this, like, there's something that they were getting out of being sick and labeled and medicating, right? They were getting something out of it, or they wouldn't have done it.
I personally feel from a spiritual perspective that this is really the most important time, probably for as long as we have historical records, because we have so much power now. We have so much nuclear power, chemical power, electronic power, gadget power. We are wielding enough power that any one of a dozen different things could destroy everything on this planet. And because we haven't matured spiritually and psychologically to the point of being able to be in moral harmony with that much power, we are attracting, I believe, this event to us. Because you see, if we're working with a virus, whether it's real or not, it's something that is fairly innocuous. But if we're having arguments right now over whether or not we should bomb somebody with a nuclear weapon, we are not ready for that. We don't have enough depth to really make a decision like that. So I really just feel that all of this is really bringing us to a shamanic initiation into adulthood that we have to go through together. And the process is going to help us decide whether we're allopathic or holistic, whether we're going to be participatory in our own life and participatory in the world, or whether we're just going to lay down and play dead and let somebody else do the work. And so all of the stuff that we have to look at, I think, has to be looked at, because it's almost like we're at the place in Monopoly where you get the do not pass go, because that's the way the game's played. And I think we're at do not pass go right now. We have to do this work together before we unconsciously or consciously make decisions that ultimately end or change the game so radically that we'll just re-injure ourselves and go into another round of deep trauma.
As you're describing this, I am just reflecting on this seeming fulcrum between the ever expanding experience of our innate power.
Yes.
And the, excruciating weight of responsibility.
Yes.
Because we probably unconsciously abdicate, or at least choose not to perceive fully, our own power, so that we don't have to take responsibility, right?
Yeah.
Because the taking of responsibility means that no one outside of you is going to tell you how you should behave, think, or feel. You are in charge of that. And it's like the good news and the bad news, right? Is that you are, in fact, in charge of that. So if I'm sitting around and every time I use a piece of plastic and put it in my recycling bin, imagining like that's mitigating something, I'm somehow waiting for an authority or a system to tell me when it's too much, right? Tell me when it's time to quit that, rather than interrogating myself, my own values, and my own connection, really, to feeling when something is no longer in integrity. I'm not sourcing from within to direct my behavior. And I've had even little tastes of this, even though I am such a radical believer in holistic medicine. The other day I started, or maybe like 2 weeks ago, I started a practice of ovarian breathing, right? Because the kitchen's closed. I don't want any more kids. I'm good, right?
Yeah, me too.
Kitchen is closed, and I very much enjoy making love.
Yeah.
So, how do I, take responsibility for this aspect of my, physical experience as a woman, and not fall into the random universe of like, oh, I could just randomly get pregnant. I guess it could happen if one day there's a sperm and the egg or whatever. I don't believe in that. I believe, as we've been discussing, that I will be reflected that which I have not yet explored. So, of course, I have to explore all of my fears about getting pregnant again and what that would mean, etc. But then I started to do this ovarian breathing, which is a Taoist practice, to begin to recirculate the energy of my, ovarian reserves and distribute it through my body. And the goal would be that I lengthen my cycles out and I really stop ovulating at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that little nagging skeptic voice that said, this is not going to work for you, Kelly. Like, you don't have what it takes to make this work. You'd have to be like a Taoist mistress, right? Like, to really succeed at this. So why are you bothering? Find another way to figure this out. And it was just this like, wow, like I could hear my own, sort of shadow speak to me in this self-denigrating way. And I could really perceive like, I don't actually want to take responsibility for this. And that's why I am choosing not to experience my own power in this realm. And that, as we teeter on that, the more awareness we can generate around the decision that we have that we don't have power in a certain realm, because it really is like it's a decided perception.
Yeah.
It may be more accurate to say that we're choosing not to take responsibility, and why, right? Why is that childlike posture of dependency, outsourcing of agency, more comfortable in one given arena of our life? What is it that we're getting out of it? Because usually, I always tell my patients this, like, there's something that they were getting out of being sick and labeled and medicating, them, right? They were getting something out of it, or they wouldn't have done it. And there are myriad things that we can get out of our experiences of disempowerment that go beyond just that it's a familiar vibration. We can experience validation. We can experience, the empowerment of being right about how wronged we are. And really, it's a surrogate empowerment. And maybe there are many ways that we push away aspects of our life that we wouldn't otherwise have the wherewithal to confront. We don't have to if we're sick, right? We have a built-in excuse.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's so many ways that we can explore why it is that we aren't stepping into our full power.
I think, having looked at this quite extensive, because I've had to do a lot of research into the mind to help understand why people seem to stay trapped in chronic pain. But when I did a lot of this research and just through observation, as I said earlier, we now have so many people that have been indoctrinated into this way of living that what I call the center of gravity of society is actually quite low. So I talk about, for example, in my training program where I teach how the chakra system works and how consciousness evolves, I say it's because my student, one of the big things that happens, unfortunately, maybe fortunately, is a high number of my students, when they come through our first level of professional training to be a holistic lifestyle coach, which is holistic lifestyle coach level 2, is where they do intensive training to actually do it for a living. But a lot of people go home with such clarity that they've been living a lie, that there's a lot of divorces that come out of that class. So, because people finally realize I got to stop bullshitting myself. And so why I bring that up is because I tell students in my class, there's one thing you need to be very aware of if you're my student. If you get more than one arm's length ahead of somebody you're in a relationship, like your spouse, the relationship's going to start breaking down, because they're going to start feeling like your child, and you're going to have a hard time relating to them. And one arm's length is one chakra. So if your partner is centered in the second chakra, but your consciousness rises to the third, and you're not coming together, it creates such a radical shift in your viewpoint that you have a hard time figuring out why you were in love with that person, or why do you want to stay with them, So if you can't find ways to be empathetic to them or to be supportive of them or to help inspire them to grow with you, then it almost always leads to a crisis in the relationship. So why I'm describing that specifically is because there's always a center of gravity in any relationship, whether it be two people or 8 billion of them. And our culture's center of gravity is still very materialistic and consumeristic and very comfortable not thinking for themselves. So when there is such a mass of the population stuck at that center of gravity, you have to really be ready to go on the hero's journey, because the instant you depart from that, you now are out of the consensus reality. Now you're like somebody walking around with an elephant's trunk glued to your nose, naked, and a sign on your back that says, "Come criticize me because I'm different." You know, and if you're not ready to deal with that, then what happens is you fall right back into the child archetype, because you need other people's approval. You need a sense of validation. And we're at a time where a lot of us have to be brave enough and comfortable enough to step into our truth and model it to people, not expecting them to have to change, but to show them what it looks like to have a level of freedom and a level of commitment, be it to our health or to our own spiritual philosophy or to our growth in relationship or to our commitment to the environment. But very few people are ready to actually accept the death threats that you got, or that anything can happen. And that's the difference between the hero that's on the hero's journey and the person that's still sitting at home just complaining about everything while they keep doing it. And so I think that's a hard transition we have to work through. And one of the big problems, unfortunately, is that, forgive me for saying this, everybody, but it seems like the people with the least level of development intelligence get the most airtime in our culture. And the Bruce Liptons and the Greg Bradens and the Kelly Brogans and the Eckhart Tolles, they hardly get the airtime. If we somehow could balance it out so that people could actually have as much exposure to those that have grown up, to those that are making a lot of money for, being silly and watching the Mob Wives or the Baseball Wives or Who's Screwing Who or whatever. I think that part of our transition is we somehow have to figure out how to balance the exposure that the average person has to influences that give them awareness that there is an option, or the inertia that they're dealing with is very strong.
And, who are we to say that they should do that? That's what I keep coming back to, right? Like maybe their interlife choice was to almost as a martyr, right? To play that part of the person pretending to be asleep. And, I've had this experience even with my own parents, that childlike longing I had as I started to go on this journey of like, hey, come with me. Look at, I'm doing Kundalini training. Isn't it interesting? Come to a class. Or, as I started to do shadow work, then there was a lot of like feeling of judgment that they had around my characterization of my childhood, etc. And I really got to the point where I no longer needed to share even a narrative reality about the life that we experienced together, for those years that I was growing up as a child. I didn't need for them to agree or validate, because I started to see what it would require of them, which is for them to go back and do their own, childhood trauma work, and to acknowledge and recognize, that their parents weren't these idealized or vilified figures. And who am I to say that they should do that work? For the reasons we're saying, it's not my business whether or not, they do that work or they're ready to. And it's certainly not my role to, coerce or even inspire them. And that's why, I'm a big believer in, what I kind of have called an order of operations and a Maslow's hierarchy of needs around in how to enter into this sort of self-discovery process. And I think that if it starts with the chopping wood and carrying water of your daily lifestyle choices, as I know you agree, if you just start there and you begin to recognize, that all of these physiologic nuisances that you have, your bloating, your joint pain, your insomnia, your irregular cycles, whatever it is, and maybe you're on a bunch of meds, and you start to recognize that there might be a better way. Like that's kind of
Hmm.
the only thing that you got to listen for is like that little whisper that says, there's a better way for you personally, not for her or that superwoman or Wonder Woman, whatever. For you personally, there's a better way. Are you ready?
Yeah.
And then you start to commit. I'm a big believer, as I know you are, in the power of discipline.
Yeah.
And you commit to just for a little while. I found, that 44 days, 40 days, 30 days, in that realm. Commit, 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 commit. Like your life depends on it. And see what gets ignited in you when you change your breakfast, when you change your bedtime, when you change the kind of water you're drinking or whatever it is. And in my experience, there's something that gets unlocked through that sort of taste of the power of choice.
Yes.
Then not only psycho spiritually prepares you, but then of course neurobiologically you have, we know that in 5 weeks you can dramatically transform neuroinflammatory patterns and processes. So then your whole bucket is drained, and then you can really take a survey of your life and start to look at your marriage, your job, or your relationship to your parents or your children. You can start to really, soberly assess whether there's something you've not wanted to say or deal with, or something that you've been hiding even from yourself.